listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me today, Mr. Kevin Durso. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing okay. Longtime listeners might notice a little bit of a frog in my throat today. The allergies are doing their business, but
everybody fighting some stuff. So
absolutely,
it's that time of year, playoff push time, right?
Exactly. Players are playing injured. John Tortorella's playing with a hurt wrist, coming back from suspension. We're all playing a little hurt right now. So, and on that note, by the way, we are going to be taking next week off because that would kill one or both of us. So we're gonna take next week off. We'll be back the following week, 1 week closer to the playoffs. Will the Flyers still be in it? We'll get into that. We're diving into the show here. Before we do, hit us up on social media at YWT Podcast. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso. Find us everywhere you find your podcast, including sportstalkphilly.com. So diving right into it. It's been a tough little go for the Flyers. And
sure,
I know we talked about the 10-game stretch, and more specifically after San Jose, the 7-game stretch. It started, right? And you beat San Jose, but you've lost the other 2 games this week. You lost to Toronto on Thursday. You lost to Boston on Saturday night.
Yeah.
We talked about them getting points in 4 or 5 of these games and hopefully coming out of this with 4, 5, 6 points and, all these things that we were trying to, accomplish. And starting out 0-2 with no points doesn't really help you out.
No, because it puts pressure on you now. Because if you need points, the pressure builds with each game that passes. You're missing opportunities to potentially get them. And I know that it's hard to say that to an extent because of the fact that you go back and look at the scores and you say, well, what's the missed opportunity? They just got, relatively blown out. Like you can look at the Tampa game and say it's just a blowout. So what's the difference? Right. It's easy to say that after it's the second game of the 10-gamer. It's now we're through 5 of the 10 and you sit there and you go, that could have been an opportunity. Yep. You can always look back on it that way, one way or the other, so the week was kind of the tone for the week was a little bit set by that San Jose game because it wasn't pretty. Like we sat here a week ago and talked about come out and dominate that team right. and beat them the way the Islanders just had.
Put 6 or 7 goals up on them.
Right. You grinded out a 3-2 win.
Yep. And it was a nice little win.
Well, sure, because at that point, like what people have to understand is that as much as everybody would want this, would love to see the 6-2 win that you dominate and it's not even close,
right,
against a team like that, you'll take the points and the wins any way you get them at this time of year. So, bottom line was at the end of that night, it was you needed 2 points against a team like that, and you got them. It was, it's very much like it felt exactly the same way as the Chicago game, where it was, right before that game, John Tortorella said, "Oh, that game scares me because there's there's clearly an emotional drop off. It's a little bit harder to get invested in these games." And it was after everything. It was not just about from a playoff standpoint. It was you just played this big outdoor spectacle in the Stadium Series. You're getting 3 days off, and now you go play one of the bottom feeders. You got to still get up for it.
It's a trash
and ultimately
game,
they did, and they won the game. But 3-1 was not exactly dominant either. It was kind of just you made it through. It was never really in doubt in a weird way, but it was also close. Like it was still a 2-goal game at the end of the thing.
Right. Yeah.
This was totally different. This is a 3-2 game where you're like, it's tied 2-2 at the end of the second period.
Yep.
You got to grind this thing out. You got to, this is not certain going into the third period. Right. And you do what you have to do, and good for you for doing it. But it was either going to do one of 2 things. It kind of either set the tone for, well, then it means you've got way more to give against Toronto, Boston kind of level type stuff. Like you're going to have way more to give and you got through the trap and now find a way in one of those. Or it set the tone the other way where it was, there's a lot of issues going on right now. And these are going to creep up even more when you play the Torontos and Bostons, and that's more or less what happened.
Yep. Well, and I do think it's important, by the way, just to give a little context. It's that time of year where the standings are really important. And we're looking at the standings. We're talking games at hand. We're talking points accrued. Like it's officially playoff race season. And just to give a little bit of an update here, just to give a little context to where we are currently sitting on Sunday morning as we record this, the Philadelphia Flyers have 68 games played, 76 points. They're in third place in the Metro. The second wild card is Detroit with one fewer game played, 2 fewer points. So they're 1 game behind with 1 game in hand. Clean. The Washington Capitals are currently the Washington Capitals and the Islanders are tied for the first seed outside.
I'm gonna help you out.
Oh, you should have it up. Cool, awesome.
If you're watching
on our YouTube channel, Kevin is pulling it up on the screen.
We'll just cut it. We'll cut it here because this is really the bulk of what matters. The Atlantic matters. So you got this.
Exactly. So the first 2 spots outside the playoffs are the Washington Capitals and the New York Islanders. Currently both sitting at 73 points with 66 games played. Mm-hmm. So 3 points behind the Flyers with 2 games in hand. But both teams have struggled at times to accumulate 3 points over 2 games. So it's... The Flyers' struggles have been tough, but the rest, no one else is grabbing it. Like we talked about it a little bit in the group chat, but nobody wants the 3rd playoff spot in the Metro. Nobody wants the 2nd wild card spot. Of course, right? Of course, they all want it. But
no. I'm not disputing what you're saying. It's more. It's interesting how this played out because let me kind of document it this way because I put this out on Thursday as the Toronto game was happening. And then this is almost exactly how Saturday played out.
Okay.
So on Thursday, just for context, I'm going to try to go back through my, tweets and stuff like that because Thursday was probably I really have not been playing this card a lot during the course of the last several weeks in terms of I haven't really played on social anyway, played the scoreboard watching card.
Right.
Let's tell you what's I'll put out there what's happening in these other games. I'm paying attention. Of course, we're all paying attention, but I'm not going to feed into this right now. There's just too much time left. Get me down to a certain point. No. Okay. This was when it turned over to March.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't feeding into this thing. I was not going to sit there and start putting out every time the Islanders did this or the Red Wings did this or
20
whatever.
games left is a lot to do it.
Right. It still felt like too much. And I got through 2 more weeks and it's okay, we're now halfway through March and we're literally a month from the end of the regular season.
We're 4 weeks in the playoffs.
And not only that, but I think the other reason why is because of the gauntlet. There was still an element where you know what it was also though too, it was kind of the first game, March 1st was a Friday and they played Washington, they lost and Washington got back to within I think 4 points that night or something.
Yeah.
And then immediately gave it back basically. And it was there's still not a lot of pressure with this right now. And it's not it's heated up the way that we thought. Every time we think that something's going to heat up with this and it's going to they're going to get, the temperature's being turned up on them in the 3rd spot. It felt like it wasn't sticking and they would, they beat Ottawa the next night and they got a point out of the St. Louis game. And then they beat Florida too, to kind of kick off the gauntlet. And you're kind of
okay now.
Well, you're kind of okay now, but you know what else I think made me not do it to an extent? The trade deadline, because you're still playing this game of, who's selling, who's not,
right?
Who's really a legitimate player in this?
Yeah. And once you get over the trade deadline hump,
once you're past that, even if teams sold, if they're still hanging around, you still have a reason to watch them. And that's where I think you're going to start paying attention to, here's what the results of these teams are saying. Nothing's changing. They're not getting help anytime soon, unless it's via injury replacement. A guy comes back from injury. So and
we'll talk about that. Don't you?
Oh, worry. I know. In the midst of the Toronto game, somewhere along the way, and I believe it was throughout the course of the 3rd period. So it was after the 2nd period of the Flyers game had ended. So I put out right away. So the first thing that happened was the Buffalo Sabres defeated the New York Islanders 4-0. And by that point going in, by the time the 2nd period of the Flyers game was over, that was pretty well at hand.
Yeah.
I think it was 3-0 at that point anyway. Yeah. But you're still, I don't do anything I try not to do in-game stuff because everything changes on a dime sometimes. So I try not to be too in game and because I also feel there's an element of if you put that out there and start bringing up hey, look, they're losing 3-2 in the late 3rd period. You're begging for the tying goal to happen.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? You're almost speaking it into existence.
Little superstitious Kevin today.
No. I you know what it is? It's more, I know how people react. It's like the shutout thing. If you bring an attention to a shutout, then people are way to go,
Right.
And it's so I'm not going to bother to put it out there. I always will sit there and say, what I always will sit there and say is in a 5-0 game that's looking like a shutout. If somebody gives up a goal to lose the shutout, I sit there and go, well, the only reason that the only storyline left in this one is gone. And I do it after the fact. I do not try to speak it into existence because I know how people react on social. So that one happens. Then Arizona defeated Detroit 4-1. Tampa did get a win, but Tampa's kind of inconsequential in that.
Tampa's pretty in the playoffs at this point.
And so pretty much right after it was pretty much right after that Toronto game was officially out of hand, because let's remember at the time I'm putting those scores out and it's the end of the second period, kind of approaching the third for the Flyers. It's 3-1.
Yep.
They're still very much involved in that game if they play a good third period. You can
especially the team we've seen this season.
Right. And even if it turns into, they were down 3-1 to Toronto before this season and they got a point out of it by getting it to overtime. Okay. You'd still take that right now, because what I'm feeding you at that point is this team lost, and this one won, and it didn't really make that big of a difference.
And Toronto loves blowing 3-goal leads. They just did it to Carolina last night.
Sure. So this was what I put out there. This is the response that I had, and I said, the fact that no one seems to want to gain points in the East is helping the Flyers tonight. So scoreboard watching is fun, but there's plenty of time for everybody to figure it out, especially while the Flyers defense is floundering due to injuries and quality of opponents. Now, one of the things before I even get there, I don't think I even followed up with it. Now, I did have somebody who came back and goes, Devils, Penguins, Sabres, Lightning all won. What are we talking about? Islanders. And I went, mainly the Islanders and Red Wings. Lightning aren't a factor, and the others are all 7 points back of the Flyers or more. Let them get to within 4 before you're really scoreboard watching for them.
Yep. Well, and like I've said before, by the way, the Islanders are terrible. They're 29-37. Most nights they're going.
Well, yeah, and sure, and we'll get there. So this is kind of what I'm talking about. So obviously they lose the game to Toronto because now it got out of hand pretty much almost immediately within. And it was like, okay, listen, you got lucky in the sense that the two closest teams that you need to really pay attention to, which are the team that's in the second wild card and the team that's trailing you at fourth in the division, they've lost. So the Islanders were still sitting at 72 points. The Red Wings were still sitting at 72. You're at 76. You come out of that night, no harm, no foul. You're still 4 points up. Essentially, right? Of both, of the final playoff spot and the Metro spot.
Right. Clear 5 points or 4 points up on two.
Okay, great. As the afternoon progressed on Saturday, you got one and the other. You were so dangerously close to the Islanders not factoring into this at all. They were trailing 3-2 in the final minute of regulation. They did get it tied, but they lose in overtime. So you know what? You settle with that almost, because it actually transformed Saturday's game to get a point, and it's actually not as bad as it seems because you maintain. And Detroit wins, but all right, Detroit beat Buffalo. That was kind of a weird situation because at the same time, when Detroit lost on Thursday and as everybody else was losing on Thursday, Buffalo kept winning and all of a sudden was creeping up on being part of this again. So you're kind of like, hey, listen, this one doesn't matter. If somebody wins, if you don't win or get points, they're still going to be close to you when it comes down to it.
Right.
So that was kind of the start of things. And then I didn't put it down for the rest of the night because there was really no reason to track anybody after that because they lost. Let's just go off of that. Right.
Right.
But as it went on, I mean, if nothing else, Pittsburgh had lost to the Rangers. They kind of dropped further out of the race. Okay, fine. The Devils lost to Arizona. They dropped further out of the race. Okay. Tampa gets another win, but again, Tampa's got more points than you do now, but
again, it doesn't really
being
matter.
First wild card is not going to factor in here. But that's about the only thing you're competing with there is that if you drop to a wild card spot, you now would have to take the number 2 spot.
Yes,
that's about it.
Yep.
And then really there was no other game of consequence until after the fact when Washington played Vancouver and they won in regulation. So now they're the one team that really didn't help the situation. Detroit, it doesn't matter yet until the Islanders, or at least in the moment, it was until the Islanders make it matter.
Right.
Well, until you're back in play for wild card, it doesn't. Even they don't matter. But now Washington got 2 points, and they are there as well. Yeah. And one catch here, and people can see it clearly on the screen if you're looking, because what makes the Islanders not as big of a threat is if they tie you. you still get the advantage because of regulation win.
Yeah, they have 29 wins.
And it's not even close. No, it's not about win total. Regulation wins, it's 26 to 21.
Oh, you're right. 21.
So it's not even relatively close. Yeah. And you got to figure, too, that the Flyers have 14 games left. The Islanders have 16 left. And you're talking about a 5-game gap in regulation wins. That's hard to make up.
Yeah, it's unlikely to happen.
So what you're worried about from them is more than just 3 points. It's really 4, kind of, at that point. But Washington, on the other hand, not only gets the win, they get the win in regulation, and all of a sudden they're 3 points back. The regulation win total is exactly the same. They've got 2 games in hand where they could pass you directly. And while I still think that they're less likely of a threat just because they sold more and their schedule is still going to be tough, they've maintained this pretty well. It's not like they went, for their own version of a gauntlet. And I'll pull up Washington's schedule in front of me right now just to go off of this, because it started the way that we all thought. Yeah, you beat Pittsburgh, you beat Chicago. Okay, fine. They go on the road. Winnipeg, 3-0 loss. Go on the road. Edmonton, 7-2 loss. It's kind of like, okay, that's exactly what we thought was going to happen. You're not going to be able to handle those types of teams on the road at this time of year with everything that happened. But you get a 2-1 win against Seattle and you get a 2-1 win against Vancouver, and you're right back in it because nothing else has changed on the other end. And they've got one more against Calgary. Now, granted, they come back from playing Calgary and it's Toronto, Carolina, Winnipeg, Detroit, who if Detroit finds their footing, that's, who knows. And even if they don't, and that's the one game you can win more easily than the others.
That Detroit game could be a huge game.
Sure. But even if that's the one that you do win, you follow it up with Toronto, Boston.
Yep.
So like the rest of their month is you get Calgary and then Toronto, Carolina, Winnipeg, Detroit, Toronto, Boston. Like there's not a non-playoff. There's really, at that point, there's not a non-playoff game in there.
Right. And the Flyers have mostly a similar setup, but the difference is the Flyers are in the advantaged position.
Right. For now. I mean, like that's the thing. And
of course.
So,
but you put yourself there and you give yourself an opportunity. And by the way, just to mention Sunday briefly here, as we sit here recording on Sunday morning, the Islanders are playing the Rangers at 1:00 Eastern.
Mm-hmm.
And the Red Wings are playing the Penguins at 6:00 Eastern. Those are the only like super relevant teams playing today. That is information that may be out of date by the time you're listening to the show.
Well, and I'm going to tell you right now, just to kind of like preface this and get it like build it, because there's a handful of others that do not matter. Like, okay, Winnipeg plays Columbus. That game does not matter. San Jose, Chicago does not matter. Really, Ottawa, Carolina does not matter in this. And the other game also later is a West game, Anaheim, St. Louis. So you're right. Like you're pretty much looking at mostly those two. The only other one I'm going to bring in is that the Devils play Vegas at 3:30 as well. I'm not putting the Devils really in this as much. And here's as far as I will take this. They lose that game in regulation, they're pretty much done.
I think they're pretty much done regardless.
Like, I think they are too, but like I think my point also in saying that is that so the Devils have like this is and this is kind of why I view Buffalo in the same vein, right? Buffalo's got the same number of games played that the Flyers do. And despite the fact that the Flyers have not won a lot lately, they are still, what is that, 7 points up on that spot with the same number of games to play. That's a lot to make up in 14 games. Good
Buffalo's
luck.
In a tough spot.
Especially, and Buffalo's in a spot where it becomes no margin for error. If the Devils do not gain, like basically if the Devils do not win, because they're going to be
in that spot.
Right. Well, because it'll be the same. And if they lose in regulation, which is certainly a distinct possibility against a team like Vegas, if they do not win in regulation, they are 8 back with the same number of games left.
Yeah.
It's pretty much over. Like to me, Pittsburgh, it's over.
The Devils have 15 games left. They probably have to win 12 of them.
It's like something like that.
They're in pretty tough shape. Sorry, Devils fans.
But like here's the catch with this, because there's like I know that, and we've done this in situations past. Pretty much, I mean, at this point, we've done this going on a month now, because it's been exactly a month since the Stadium Series game. And the morning after the Stadium Series game was like, oh no, what a big swing! The Devils are now 5 points back. Here it comes, and then it settled down.
Yep.
And then you had the kind of lost weekend where you didn't get any points against the Rangers or Pittsburgh. And again, there was kind of this panic of like, oh, here it comes again. They didn't do anything about this, and now everybody's going to close in on it again, and still nothing happened. And then the game against Washington happened, and still nothing happened with it. And you're still kind of there now. The thing that's kind of interesting to me is that they're holding the third spot, and there are 2 teams that are out of the playoff picture that are in your division that are basically there, and that's really it. And depending on, like, you're watching Tampa and Detroit for the wild card in the event that one of those 2 teams does continue to threaten that position. But there's not real, like, it's basically a 5-team battle for 3 spots. That's still a good percentage.
Yeah. Especially when at this moment, again, you are still kind of the top dog in that. Like,
right. And that's the thing. Like, that's all I'm trying to get at is, like, there's still there's 3 spots up for grabs. You are currently holding one of them, and there's only really 2 teams that are trying to get in there at this point. They're not trying, but like that are really threatening to get in there.
See, it's crazy because I really thought you were going to come in today and talk about, I don't know, guys. You know, they're losing all these games and they're falling out. And
well, no, I have reasons why I'm doubtful still.
Okay,
but what I'm trying to do is just kind of give people the idea that if you're trying to, like, I don't find any of these other teams to be a threat, but I'm not going to dismiss Washington or the Islanders at this point. That's more of where I'm worried about. Is
by the way, Ovi 19 goals
all of a sudden. Yeah,
all of a sudden,
up a little. I mean, but this is how it is. As he goes, they go.
Like, he could end up with 35. Like, it's not crazy.
If they make the playoffs, he might have to.
I mean, if he hits 40, they probably make the playoffs.
Well, I don't think he's going to score at that clip anymore. Just because, like, it's what he's done already is impressive as it is. I don't think you're getting. I'm saying I don't think he's going on an Austin Matthews run where it was like 3, 2, 1, 3. You know, like, I don't think you're getting that.
Don't put this clip on social media.
No. I just don't think he's got that kind of left in him. But I'm not doubting.
I didn't say that, Alex.
No. I'm not doubting the fact that he couldn't go out and score like 8 and 10 though. That's all I'm saying. I don't think he's going to put up like 15 and 12.
I don't know, dude. Can you see him popping off for 4 goals in a game?
I mean,
can you see him doing that 3 times over the next 2 weeks?
No, and I'll tell you actually, and I'll say no, and I'll tell you why. Because he's not going to face goalies that will allow that. The teams they're facing are too good to allow him to have that level of a game. 4 goals. I'm never doubting that he can score 2 in a game. He nearly did anyway in the game, like in the game last night, because there was an empty net situation and he nearly got one there, and it was like. We would be talking about that too. You know, the guy who's got more empty net goals than anybody in NHL history, right?
Speaking of goaltenders,
I know.
And to kind of circle back to the Flyers here.
Yeah, we can, and we can also kind of we can kind of ditch
this. Yeah, we can take a bump on that. Yeah. Circling back to the Flyers, talking about goalies. If you're John Tortorella, do you start Felix Sandstrom on Saturday night against the Boston Bruins in Boston?
Oh, why are you going here with me?
So here's the thing. There were questions about, how much is Sam Erstrom playing? Is it too much? Does he need a day off? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think he did.
I want to start this whole thing with, if I would have told you that they would start Felix Sandstrom and David Pastrnak would not score a goal, would you have believed me? Probably
not really,
to
be honest with you, especially when you tell me that Boston scores 6.
Sure. All right. Let's put this way for 1 second, okay? Because goaltending in general has been a topic lately. I see it every game. This was the price you were going to pay for how much Ersson was playing. And here's where I'm kind of going with this. I had told you this before, and listen, I'm not trying to fall into this trap because John Tortorella doesn't like this, so I'm not going to do his job.
Okay.
Even though he wasn't on the bench for this particular game anyway, he still had some control.
He was allowed to be around the team until 4:00 on game day.
Well, he wasn't
still decided the starting goalie.
Just for what it's worth, he wasn't there on Thursday, by the way.
Not at all, or did he leave?
Nope. No, he wasn't there.
Okay.
He did. I guess they did morning skate, and he did not bother to go after that.
Okay, but he was at morning skate. Okay, so he's still.
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
He the only reason
I say I don't know because I don't know because he didn't speak pregame on Thursday. They sent Brad Shaw out to do it.
Okay, if
So
John
I don't even know if he
Tortorella
went into the
wanted to
building
know
that
who
day.
the starting goaltender was, he could know who the starting
Oh,
goaltender
he can pick it.
was.
Yeah, he can still give
Right, let's
direction.
be honest.
No, I wasn't saying he didn't have influence. I'm just saying, for what it's worth, he actually, as much as he was allowed to still be in the building, he opted not to be for the Toronto game.
Interesting.
I
He probably just didn't want to deal with the media. I
found
assume
that
he didn't want to
interesting
deal
too.
with the Toronto media coming in.
I don't know. He doesn't address the media anyway after the game, so it didn't matter.
True.
He wasn't. Tuesday it was Rocky Thompson and Thursday it was Bradshaw, so it didn't matter. Bottom line, I had thought, regardless of how everything else had played out leading into it, I still thought the opportunity was there to give Sandstrom the start against San Jose.
Yeah,
it just made a lot of sense. Now, maybe your thinking is, that's an opportunity to get 2 points. Don't screw around with this. Just get the points. Put your best guy out there and get the
given
points.
how the game turned out, makes a lot of sense.
You can't deny that part of it.
Right.
So if that's the way that you wanted to approach it, that's fine. Then I guess I don't have a problem with the way that they go about Saturday, just because, listen, next weekend you're going to do this anyway. You're playing Boston and Florida, and somebody else is going to have to start a game. And listen, for 2 periods, Sandstrom didn't look half bad, so maybe you do give him the start against Boston again and just say, give it your best. Okay. And Harrison, who's kind of had Florida's number, you give Harrison Florida and say, look, maybe we get 2 points out of that somehow. I don't know. It's all the guessing game at this point, because it goes so far. Like, goaltending's the hot topic because it's so easy to focus on. It's hardly the reason why everything happened the way that did. It's part of it, but it's all part of a giant equation. It is not, oh, it's just this. Like, you can look back on, for very similar games, you can look back and go, you scored 6 goals against Pittsburgh. You scored 5 against Boston. You got no points to show for either of them. It's really easy to just go, goalie's the problem. You gave up this many.
It's a little bit different when you're playing from behind like that. Like
it is, but here's the other part. Well, it isn't. It was until you weren't, kind of, if you know where I'm going.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
No, I know. Well, because no, for a time it wasn't that big of a deal, and then it became a big deal by the end of this game. But the difference between the Pittsburgh game and the Boston game is that you knew what kind of team Boston was, and they're right up. They're actually now officially, with that win, and Florida did not beat Tampa, they're officially back in the number 1 spot in the league.
Yep.
So is not exactly the same as playing a team that was fighting for its playoff life at that moment, that all of a sudden comes out and just peppers you and scores 7 against your backup, who looked like he couldn't stop a beach ball that day.
Yeah.
That's a big difference.
Yep.
This was still Boston. This was always still a threat. And to be honest, that's what was so exciting about the first 2 periods, was you're playing well enough that you are in a position to, at minimum, I know that people immediately were coming out on going into the third period with win a period, win a game, because that was true.
Right.
You're sitting there going, as far as I'm concerned, you should be sitting there going, tie, get it to overtime. Like,
get the point,
because that was still part of the equation. You just need to get some points. And you knew what kind of, especially with the way that everything kind of set up, it's like you're choosing to play your backup so you can give Harrison some rest in a game that could easily come off the rails. And through 2 periods, it really hasn't. Like, I'm not saying you haven't weathered the storm a little bit, but you have not let this thing come off the rails yet. And then the third period happens. And, there's not really anything that Sandstrom can do on the first 2 goals that were allowed over the first 2 periods. The one's off of a rush. It's a good slap shot. It goes into the top corner. Maybe there's a little something there, but I'm not going crazy with it. The power play goal, there was no shot.
You're right. Coming into the season, Felix Sandstrom was your 3rd or 4th goalie in your organization. You're not super duper. You have to have reasonable expectations for him.
Well, and beyond that, it's Sam Harrison in goal for that power play goal that they score at the end of the second period. Sam Harrison in goal isn't stopping that either. No, so, absolutely. Be realistic about it. 2 guys collide off of the face-off and leave 2 guys wide open.
Right.
I don't care who your goalie is. I don't care if your goalie is Andre Vasilevskiy, Connor Hellebuyck.
Prime Henrik Lundqvist isn't stopping that one.
It doesn't make a difference. Exactly. So you start there. I thought that the first goal of the third period, Sandstrom kind of backs in and gets low. which is two big mistakes there because one, you're not giving yourself much of a chance to take many angles away from a shot there.
Right.
And then you leave the entire top shelf open for Charlie Coyle to go upstairs. So looking back on it, it turns out to be a nice guy. Don't get me wrong. Nobody else kind of gets a clean slate for this because he weaves his way through the defense to get there.
Oh no. Yeah, absolutely.
But Sandstrom backs in and does expose a lot there. So it's a collection of 4 guys are on the ice defending because it's a 4-on-4, and then the goalie didn't help you either. Like, it's both.
Yep.
What happens immediately after is really hard to pin on Sandstrom. I mean, it's a bunch of standing around and nobody's doing anything.
No.
It was just flat out pathetic. It was like you came out and completely forgot how to play the game. And then all of a sudden, of all people, too, there's just under 6 minutes left, and of all people, Nick Delorier scores a goal.
Yep.
And it was as if a switch went off.
And you go, huh?
No, it wasn't even about what you're thinking. It was as if a switch went off, and all of a sudden, they look like an all-star team.
They did. They dominated the Boston
They get
Bruins.
the next one basically a minute later. It was a minute 2 later.
Yep.
Now, all of a sudden, you went from, 5-3 with 5:50 left. That's not, it's not impossible.
It's a game. Right.
It's not impossible, but you're not really thinking anything to
5-4 all of a sudden.
It's a 1-goal game with 4:48 left.
Yep.
Or 4:46 left or something like that. And it's like, now this is a real thing. And then immediately after, they're pushing.
All of a sudden,
after, they're like right there on the doorstep trying to tie this game up.
Boston Bruins are on their heels at home. Yeah.
And you give up a rush going the other way. And this is it's the biggest thing with Felix Sandstrom, and it's going to be the biggest thing that hangs around. For the last year and a half, and it's not entirely a year and a half because he hasn't been here for a chunk of this year. He's really this is his 4th appearance this year, 2nd start. So he hasn't really played that much. It's entirely been John Tortorella's biggest thing when he was backing up last year at different points was it's the one more save. There's one more save you need and you don't get it from him.
Right.
And this was it right there.
Yep.
It's a 5-4 game. You're pressing. They get one opportunity and his angle is off and you can see it.
Beat bad.
You can see it. His angle is off. So he gets beat, and it becomes what feels like game over. You get it right back. So you're still playing with it down 1 with 2 minutes left. So it's still a fighting chance. But you can't help thinking about. There's 2 things you can't help thinking about. One is if you stop the bleeding even after 2 goals at the start of the period, then you have a fighting chance because even that 1 goal that Delorier scores, you're trying to come back from
back in it.
Down 1. And then the 6th one, because again, it's like you're pushing and you've got 4 minutes to do it and you give that goal up. It cannot happen in that spot. No. And I don't want to make this a show where we pile on Felix Sandstrom specifically because
no.
Because I played a little game yesterday to an extent because I wrote down, I didn't take many notes for this show, but I wrote down this morning kind of the list of people who I see popping up that become discussion points throughout the course of the games right now.
Okay.
To an extent. And I actually want to start in a different direction with this. I want to start with the group of players that I feel like have been either your best or most consistent and why that's a problem.
Okay.
I will give full marks to whatever line Morgan Frost has been on lately because he's kind of looked like he's been shot out of a cannon lately.
By the way, you touched on the 5-4 goal from him to bring it back in the game. Between the legs? Ew.
Absolute filth. I know.
And if you haven't seen the clip yet, go look it up. Guys around the league have been doing it for the last several years now. Just that in tight move where you're cutting across the front of the net a little bit and you just bang between the legs, go up high, get it over the goalie's pad. And
I don't even know if he actually goes up high. I think it goes between the 5-hole and then rides up somehow.
Oh, it did, didn't it?
It stays low at first, but if you're a goalie in that spot, you're almost shell-shocked by the move because it's like, what is he trying to pull off?
Where's he going? Right. Yeah, he kind of going for the poke check, and it didn't really work out.
Right. You get caught in between. Yep. Exactly. So
hesitation.
Right. So he's been great lately. Yes. And it seems like whatever line he's been on has kind of followed. I believe his line mates in the Boston game were Farabee and Tippett. So they didn't look half bad. Farabee ended up with 2 goals, and Farabee's been, kind of on a scoring drought lately.
Right.
He's had a rough go of it. So
and Tippett had 3 assists, by the way.
Tippett had 3 assists. But
Yeah.
Tippett had also kind of started, he scored a couple lately. He had kind of picked it back up. It was like, okay, listen, if this guy finds his scoring touch, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt in that one because I believe he'd had goals. He had one of the 2 against Toronto, and I think he had one against San Jose as well. So for him, yeah, he did. He had the eventual game winner. That's right, because that was the nice pass by Konechny.
Yes.
But he had the eventual game winner as well, and kind of in that sense, it was like, okay, back-to-back games with goals. Now you add in a 3-assist game. If you like
getting some momentum going.
One of the themes that John Tortorella brought out after this game was we need more consistency and from important guys. That's one of the people you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Is
the guy who just inked the long-term extension? Yeah, that's the guy.
Well, there's another guy I have written down who wasn't playing with him in this game, as far as I know, who it's not like he's done nothing lately, but it's not with near enough consistency, or it's kind of after the fact.
Okay.
Like Travis Konechny needs to be brought to some attention here. Yep. Like this was like he came back in that like ahead of that Florida game, and the purpose of that was for all of those other games that led into this that could have either been wins or gain a point here or whatever. They desperately missed a guy like that. Now he's back. And the first handful, like, okay, take nothing away from the Tampa game that was over in the first 10 minutes, but he made an impact in that Florida game. And then he made an impact in the San Jose game. Like, he was good in the San Jose game too.
Yeah.
So you're like, all right.
He's probably pretty healthy, right?
Regardless of being pretty healthy or not even, it was just a matter of like, is if that San Jose game could have been a warm-up for like, okay, he's making these really crazy, ridiculous plays passing-wise. They're going to need stuff like that. They're going to need him to be a catalyst. He's got to do it against everybody else. This is where you need him to do that against the Torontos and the Bostons a little bit. And
right. You need your all-star to be your elite player.
And as much as
good teams.
As much as I think that when it came down to it, he, got the occasional, like point here or whatever. It's not really coming at a point. Like, I'm going to like go and pull up that Toronto game. I think that in the Toronto game, I mean, he got an assist on the typical that like later on got them like kind of back into it, but everything else is kind of quiet. Right. And even against Boston, he's doesn't factor into anything in the first 2 periods. He got an assist on Farabee's goal at the end that made it 6-5.
Okay.
But it's like, okay, that up until that point, you hadn't done anything to kind of make your presence known other than kind of be a liability. Like defensively, you weren't very good. You weren't turning things into anything else. There were turnovers. It was not a good game. So he's one that kind of gets brought into question. This is really where I wanted to go with that, though, because I bring up whatever line Frost has been on has been kind of really good for the last handful of games. Yep. And then at this point, your most consistent line, and this is kind of the good and the bad, because this was the great thing about winning against Florida was your most consistent line was the Cates, Paling, Hathaway line. But when this kind of goes for this stretch and it's still your most consistent line,
that's a problem.
It's a problem.
Yes.
You need other people who can step up. And I'm not trying to say that, Tippett hasn't had a handful of moments or, Forster scored a shorthanded goal that was kind of meaningless, but still it was like that could be a tone setter. Frost has been obviously playing well. Farabee had 2 goals against Boston. It's not like they were invisible, but you need better than the best line is Cates, Paling, Hathaway. You need better. And it's going to bring eyes onto Konechny and Tippett and Farabee and Forster and all those guys. Sean Couturier's gotten a little bit of it lately. I'm going to tell you the biggest problem with Sean Couturier, and people are missing the point greatly because there's people who are sitting there going, it looks like he's hit a wall, and maybe he's just never going to be the player he once was. I'm going to tell you what the problem was. The problem was when you ran him out there in December playing 20 minutes a night, and now you're into March.
Well, and now you're doing the same thing to Travis Sanheim on your defense. Obviously a little bit more of an exaggerated version of it, but.
Oh, well, I'm going to get to the defense after the forwards because there's not as many forwards to get brought to attention because I feel like during the course of a game, I never hear anything about the Cates, Paling, Hathaway trio, almost ever. Like,
unless Garnet Hathaway is getting a 10-minute misconduct.
Honestly, the times he has though, like
I feel like he's picked up 3 in the last week and a half.
The one was ridiculous, and we already talked about that one from last week.
Yep.
That was worth 10, and then the other 2 were late in a game where it was like, just get out of here.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And, like he took, I think you're bringing up, he took one of them against Toronto with 2 minutes left in a 6-2 game.
Also pretty light. That was the referee just trying to kind of keep control of a game that was
sure. And with 2 minutes left, that's when I understand you doing
absolutely.
Like
first period, you don't do that.
Right. At that point, you're sitting there going, "Come on, it's 6-2, 2 minutes left in the whole game.
Just get
out of here.
Get to the final horn. Get to the buses."
Yep. Right.
No, absolutely. And
so it starts there. But I never hear anything about like, oh, this guy, offensively or defensively. Like I don't tend to hear a whole lot about that stuff. Frost goes back and forth because there's people who love him, there's people who don't, and it's kind of like there's almost no happy medium. There really should be, because the guy's a really good playmaker.
Yeah.
He does things that drive you crazy sometimes too. I get it. He goes invisible for some games. I get that too. I'm just saying I
think it matches, because he is a player who is a little bit streaky, so it makes sense that people are either pretty hot or pretty cold on him.
It kind of does. I get that. Like, my argument with him is that if you haven't watched these last handful of games and realized that he's one of your probably, and I'll say safely, he's one of your 3 or 4 most skilled players on the team, you're blind.
I think that's probably fair, among the forwards at least.
Yeah. Right. Like I give people, I will give people some credit on social during the course of the last game for kind of sitting there going like, I don't know what's going on, but Konechny doesn't have it tonight kind of deal. I will give people that credit. But it feels like he gets the benefit of the doubt so much more, and he's not even potentially as skilled as Frost is in terms of like.
Well, I also think some of that.
Like, Konechny makes plays like he did against San Jose. Yes, he's got that playmaking ability, but it's kind of like, again, it's not always the most consistent. Let's be real.
I agree, but I think some of that has to do with the fact that Travis Konechny has a much longer track record than Morgan Frost does.
It does, but it's also the edginess, and that's part of what stands out for people. It's that when you play with the edge, you get more forgiveness than the guy who doesn't.
Well, and here's the thing: if I read you 2 identical stat lines, but one guy is Travis Konechny and one guy is Morgan Frost, who would you rather have in terms of personality?
I hear you. I guess you'd rather have Konechny from a personality standpoint, but there's balance involved with both. You want both types of players. But you just hit the nail on the head, though. That's what everybody focuses on. At the end of the day, if both guys are going to go no goals, no points, and be a -2, you're going to remember that Konechny was involved because, oh, wait, he tried to get under this guy's skin and did something like that. So I noticed him, versus Frost doesn't play that way. So if Frost has no points, no goals, and is a -2.
So how is he impacting the game?
Right. And he's not noticeable.
Right.
That's what stands out.
Well, even beyond noticeability, literally, how is he affecting the game?
Right. I understand.
Travis Konechny is attempting to, like, if you're not going to win the on ice battle.
Exactly. That's the better way to phrase it. I'm going to say,
because
I don't know that he's like impacting the game. He's trying to. He's attempting to impact the game. That's fair.
If you can get under somebody's skin, if you can get them off their game in a game like hockey where the margins are so slim, if you can get somebody to take a stupid unsportsmanlike conduct penalty, or if you can get someone to slash you and break their stick, or like, there's all sorts of ways that getting under somebody's skin can give your team a significant advantage.
So let's go back to the forward roster for 1 second, because I'm just trying to like go down the list even at people who I've seen who've gotten critiqued over the last in different ways. Like, and it's really interesting. I'm skipping one name on purpose to start this, because I'm not even just starting with like this, because we'll get to it. And I already brought up Cates, so Cates kind of doesn't factor in. Couturier, we already talked about. Like, Couturier, to me, the biggest problem that you have right now is that the dude hasn't played in close to 2 years. He hasn't really played. You rolled him out there as if there were no restrictions whatsoever for the first 3 months of the year, and as if like that wasn't supposed to have an impact on when it got to game 65 to 70.
Right.
Like, I don't know what you want me to tell you.
And oh, by the way, it certainly looks like they're going to play an extra couple of playoff games on the back end. And Sean Couturier is going to take some punishment.
Well, and then to top it all off, by the way, in addition to, oh, you didn't think that, like, as if you didn't think this was going to happen by game 65 to 70, you've tried to counter that by moving him to a line with line mates that are not going to help his case in any way, shape, or form. Like, he's got to carry that line on his back.
He might be doing less work in terms of time, but he has far more responsibility.
Right. Like, it's almost not even easier. Like, I want, like,
hey, so you're going to work less, but your job is way harder.
But, like, my point was that, so for one of the recent games, he goes out and he played with Denis Gurianov, and I think Bobby Brink was on that line at one point. And it looks 10 times better because at least it doesn't feel like he has to carry that group. Gurianov wasn't great. Brink wasn't great, but at least it was better than what he had been playing with.
Yeah.
So it's not like he's carrying that. He legitimately has to carry that line.
Right. That he's on with a bad back.
Pretty much. I mean, and I'll just cut to the chase then. The two guys who he's trying to carry on that line are Nick Delorier and Cam Atkinson, who without a play, like, Delorier doesn't score that goal without Couturier being out there, because there's elements of like what Couturier was doing to win a battle and kind of get the puck into a position where Jeremy Swayman doesn't see it's going that side. So that's how he tucks it in. Cam Atkinson's been invisible for 3 weeks.
Man, I adore
longer.
I adore Cam Atkinson.
And I appreciate that he wants to work hard, and he's also trying to come back from something that kept him out for an entire year. I can appreciate all that stuff.
I adore Cam Atkinson as a person. I adore what he did for this locker room through COVID. Like, he was an incredible leader in a time where I think the team really needed a little bit of kind leadership. As we sit here in mid to late March 2024, Cam Atkinson's a tough hockey player to have on your roster, especially at the number he's making.
Well, sure. Well, that's why I'm
the Flyers aren't a team that's super duper relevant for the number.
No, but they're going to start.
How much longer can you keep it on your roster? And I think the answer is you can't.
This is why. And there was, again, I don't know if we talked a ton about this last week or not completely, because we had a lot to talk about last week. This was why there was I saw a lot of people freak out about the trade deadline, and it was why my answer was, I'm giving Danny Briere credit for trying to play both sides of the equation. I'm going to sell a player that's going to get me something for the future. I'm going to keep some of it intact. I'm going to try to make a push for the playoffs. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But I'm not going to judge all of this based off of one day or a handful of days over the course of a week. I want to see what they decide to do in the offseason to see where they even want to take this thing. Right. Because now I'm genuinely curious about a couple of factors. One of which we've already talked about. Who is the backup goalie next year? Because that's where you're really going to have a chance to address it.
And then, I expect them to.
Right. And then kind of a who stays, who goes from the offseason among both forward and defense to see who comes in and kind of where you take this thing from here. Because I can see them on one hand, I can see them playing the cards of let's do the exact same thing we did last offseason and bring in a bunch of guys on 1-2 year deals and see where it goes. And on the other, I can see them taking Cam Atkinson's money, trying to find a way to get some of it off the books and being like, let's go make a splash in some sort. It may be too soon for it, but I can see them potentially trying because I think they're, that's part of their evaluation.
I think the willingness to move Sean Walker leads me to believe that they're not gonna make a splash in free agency or in the offseason.
The reason why I don't agree is because I think they ultimately knew what they were up against in terms of both the schedule ahead, the idea that maybe you can't sign both guys, or even the possibility that with Walker you had to consider the fact that there could be a drop off. Like, I think what they do instead is when you go into an offseason, you look ahead, you kind of try to look around. And listen, I'm not talking about just look at the free agent market now either.
Right.
This gets into territory where it's like, hey, listen, what happens if you take Cam Atkinson's money, buy him out? Yes, there's stuff to pay, but like you're getting money back also because the cap's going to go up. And as you look at everything, like just food for thought with names that have been floated around in the past, no matter how legitimate it may seem, just keep in mind that the names Trevor Zegras and Jacob Chychrun keep kind of coming up in this thing. And whether they solve your problem of 1C and 1D, whether they solve that or not is irrelevant to the case, because the point is they're in their minds. There's a reason why they're interested.
I'm not going to lie to you. Adding Chychrun to Sanheim, York, Drysdale sounds pretty good.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Really? Is that just too much offense? Is that your concern?
It's not that too much offense is my concern. Maybe I worry about
lack
the fact
of defense.
A little. I worry at the fact that look, if you're acquiring Chychrun, I'm sorry, it's going to be the same thing as Drysdale. I don't think you're getting a number one. I still don't think you're getting a number one.
I don't disagree, but like, is having 4 number 2s good enough?
But this is the equation. Are they really number 2s? But are they really number 2s? That's the question. Like, you still have to, like, let's put it this way. Drysdale's not a number 2 until he stays in the lineup for more than a couple weeks. Sorry.
Valid. No, that one is entirely valid. And I really, really, really hope Jamie Drysdale can get healthy.
And it goes both ways. Like, I can't get a read on him enough to say that talent-wise he's got that ability in him. And on top of it, even if that is his ceiling, you don't hit your ceiling without playing.
I agree.
So I can't even go there. And then the other part of the equation is, and this is where the Chychrun thing kind of bothers me a little bit, or where I'm wary of this.
Okay.
Because Chychrun's in a different spot, a little bit of a different spot than Drysdale.
Okay.
I say a little bit in the sense that it's not like it's a long-term contract, but when you look at what his cap hit is, you're getting dangerously close to the territory, especially given his age too, because he's younger.
Yeah.
You're getting dangerously close to the territory where it's kind of like he's paid a little bit like Travis Sanheim. And I don't know that Travis Sanheim, he's making 4.6, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's got this year and then next year. But then he's going to be due a contract, and you consider the minutes and you consider everything like that. Like, this is a guy who's going to make 6.5 to 7 mil also.
Probably.
At least. And at the end of the day, how many guys are you going to sign to that $5 to $7 million window
and still say you're rebuilding?
Not even say you're rebuilding. That all fit the same qualifications, that aren't a number 1, maybe a number 2, and probably more likely a 3.
Some people will argue that that's what got you into this mess, is that you spent basically the entire 2010s doing that.
Exactly. Like,
and in a salary cap league, that's not sustainable. Like,
exactly.
It's not good enough.
Well, and here's another part of the equation also. Okay. You want to go play, like, Trevor Zegras' name is the other one that keeps coming up a lot, right? There's a big difference to an extent. Zegras is, first of all, Zegras is Zegras is making basically the money Cam Atkinson is. It's basically almost identical. It's actually a little less.
Okay.
He has 2 years left on the contract. And here's probably the most important factor of all of these things. He's 22.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Chychrun is not the answer right now, because you bring in Chychrun, who's 25 going on 26. You are bringing in another version of Travis Sanheim.
I don't disagree with that.
And if people out there are going to sit there watching these games and sit there and go, man, look at the dip that Sanheim basically regressed to exactly what it was, whatever, and things like that. And I kind of feel bad in that situation, like, because people aren't necessarily wrong, but I sit there and I also go, like, this is where I was trying to go with, because I was trying to get off the forwards.
Through 25 games, he looked like a Norris candidate. So, like, to backtrack from that, it's perfectly normal and acceptable.
It's not even to backtrack from that. You want your answer as to what the problem with the defense is? It's so super simple. It's not even funny.
Okay.
You've got 2 guys in Sanheim and York who are playing so far above their level because they have to. They're playing 25 to 27 a night right now. You were doing okay and this is kind of why the 7 thing, as weird as it was and as unsustainable as it was, worked, because you could limit York to 20 and Sanheim to 22 and get by a little bit. And relatively speaking, you still could when you had the Walker Sealer pair, because they were playing 20 a night too. So you were kind of balancing it out with, okay, if every one of those 4 plays 20 to 22 a night and the other 2, whomever they may be, play 17, 18, you've got some balance.
Yep.
Now you've got Sanheim trying to play 27 minutes a night, and York playing 27 a night.
Because you trade Walker and then Sealer, Ristolainen, and, like, all get hurt.
I get it. Just just let me finish.
Right.
So that's where those two are. They're playing above their heads because one, they're playing the toughest competition every night. They're playing the best that the opposition has to offer, and then they're playing 25 to 27 minutes a night in all situations, and it's gonna run them into the ground. Yep. That's simple. I give Cam York a ton of credit because Cam York has like almost embraced being more the defensive guy. He's contributed offensively a little bit, but he's embraced being the defensive guy. He's blocking shots like nobody's business anymore. All of a sudden, all of a sudden, kind of like becoming Nick Sealer Jr. a little bit in a way, with a little bit more offensive talent, obviously,
which is a good thing.
And and yet it's never going to be good enough either because it's too many minutes. It's still too many minutes for what he should play. He's just being a good soldier here and doing everything he's being asked. Then you go below that, and with the injuries, your two pairings that are left are two guys with basically next to no experience. And I get that Zamula's been here for the entire year, but he's still basically a rookie. And then Addard's got next to no experience. And it would be insert name here because like I got people who are sitting there going, well, Jennings should be up. And maybe that one I can level with.
For the record, with the current roster, I agree that Adam Jennings should be up.
Like, okay, Jennings you got a point with, but I'm seeing people who sit there and go, why not give Andre a shot? They've made abundantly clear that Andre's not ready for this level. And to be honest, if you put him in this situation, he'd be eaten alive.
Well, and let's talk about it realistically, right? The only reason you're playing York and Sanheim 27 minutes a night, the only reason you're not giving Andre a shot, the only reason all of this blah, 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 is because you're in the playoff hunt. If they were where we all thought they were going to be at the start of the season, if they were 6th or 7th from the bottom in the league, well, because you wouldn't need to. You would have Andre up. You would have probably sold more at the deadline, so you'd need to call more guys up. I don't think be able to spread it around a little bit.
They wouldn't have any less than what they have per se. You know what I mean? Like,
okay, like you might not have Sealer.
Well, Sealer's injured. That's what I mean.
So I mean,
playing without him in the lineup one way or the other, maybe that's the case. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't think anything else would have necessarily changed.
Okay.
And then you would yes, I think you would be replacing.
I think you'd have different guys up.
You'd be replacing,
I don't think Mark Stahl would be in the lineup.
I disagree.
He's atrocious.
It doesn't matter. It does not matter. It does not matter because but
I think if you're 6 spots from the bottom, it does matter. I think that's the only reason Mark Stahl is in the lineup is because they're vaguely in it.
But here's the thing. If he's playing the way that he is, then why would it? If you're 6 spots from the bottom, like then you're asking him to be a good soldier too, while you have nobody else to play. Like, let's be real about, okay, the guy that you're thinking of more than anything is Eric Johnson's not on the roster if they're not in a playoff spot. That's true. The only reason you acquire that guy. Right. Simple as that.
Right. To reward the team for having a good season.
And here's the thing, like, I'm not taking away from that, like, that because that was the other equation. You got two guys who are super young, super inexperienced, and you got two guys who are clearly past their prime. Johnson hasn't been terrible, and I'm not like that's not necessarily a compliment, but it's like they played a game. They played a game. This is all you need to know when you're focusing your attention, because everybody looks for somebody to blame every time a goal is scored, right? There's always somebody to blame.
Right.
You just played a game where 11 goals were scored, including 7 in the third period, and Eric Johnson was not on the ice for a single one. For or against.
That's funny.
So you want to point out Mark Stahl, you want to point out Travis Sanheim, be my guest. Travis Sanheim makes a bad read on the Austin Matthews goal.
Yep.
The other night. You can't just abandon the middle of the ice. You just can't.
No, especially not against that.
You know, Mark Stahl is caught standing around watching Coyle's goal, and then clips skate. You know, on Coyle's second goal, on Coyle's first goal, he clips skates with Travis Konechny.
Yep. Terrible.
But you have no choice.
Yep.
That's the thing. You have no choice, and
that's what happens when you decide not to go all in at the deadline, which again, I don't think they should have done. For the record.
Okay, like I'm going over to Twitter X at this point because I've got to pull up some of the stuff because there are, you know, like throughout the course of the game, I got various different responses that all involve somebody different.
Okay.
Because you have, you know, why is Stahl still playing? Okay, he's playing because they've got nobody else to play.
Yeah,
there's 6 healthy defensemen, and I guess, like, listen, could you argue that Jennings should be here? Sure, but it's obvious they went out and got Eric Johnson because they didn't want to play Jennings.
Yep.
Think about that.
Well, and coming down the stretch, theoretically into the playoffs, I understand where they're coming from, trying to put the veteran there instead of Adam Jennings.
I get it too. All right, so you get that. Then Sanheim's been playing terrible for a long time now. I get it, but I just explained it to everybody just now.
Travis Sanheim ain't going anywhere.
Well, it's not about him not going anywhere. It's he's playing over his head.
Yep.
For the entire year, because it's not just about for the entire year you've relied on him to play against the top guys. It's at some point you got to pull back, and it's okay. Instead of 27 minutes a night, he's got to play 22 because that's really what he can play. I'm gonna take a look here for 1 second. Just because I want to see. So Travis Sanheim played 24-56 in the game against Boston. And do you want to know why that turned out to be the case ultimately?
Okay.
More than anything? He took a roughing penalty that put the game at 4-on-4 in the middle of the second period. And then, okay, well, so no, I thought he was the one that was off the ice for the 4-on-4. No, it was York. So he was off the ice for 2 minutes. York ended up off the ice for 2 minutes. York, it didn't matter. York still played 27-18.
I will give Bradshaw credit. Thursday night, the game against Toronto, the one that was kind of out of hand pretty quickly and over by the end of the first period. Cam York led the team at 22-02, and everybody else was pretty evenly spread. So
only because it got out of hand.
Because you were down 3-0 after the first period.
Well, here's the thing, too. I'll even give them credit because go through the course of this thing, as much as everybody, here's the fact of the matter. Whether it's Mark Stahl or whether it's Eric Johnson or whatever you want to look at, because, yes, they're the two past their prime guys. They know it. Do you know how I know they know it? Because at the end of the night, Mark Stahl played in that Boston game 9:09. Did he make a bunch of mistakes in the 9:09? Sure. But he played 9:09. So, you know who made up for the difference? Cam York.
Yep.
Then what else happens? Eric Johnson played 15:21. He was the next lowest. Ronnie Attard played 15:47, which, all right, fair. It's a young guy. You're trying to kind of ease him in.
And he's looked okay.
The top three, Ronnie Attard has looked great as far as I'm concerned. I'll tell you why he's looked great. Because he hasn't had one situation over the course of these 4 or 5 games where he's been the guy that you can point out and say, that's the reason somebody just scored.
That guy
he may be on the ice for goals against, but he has not really been the reason.
Okay. That's good to see.
If nothing else, he's playing his part, and Mark Stahl's the guy coming over. I'm taking this guy now. Whoa, what are you doing? Just hold your position. Stop letting guys get behind you and have wide open looks.
Well, let's talk about when help is on the way, right? Because we're talking about Drysdale out. We're talking about Sealer out. We're talking about Ristolainen out.
Right. But okay. So can I finish with one thing really quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because the two other things that I got toward the end of the game were, and this is actually a good place to kind of pick this up because I wonder if it's in response to the same tweet that I put out. It is. Okay. So 2 people sent me a response to the same tweet having 2 different responses. Okay. But I mentioned that. So Bradshaw said on Thursday that the Flyers kind of this year, one of the things they haven't really done is let games kind of unravel on them. Meaning, the perfect example from the Thursday game was they gave up the goal to Matthews, and 8 seconds later they gave up another one to Nylander, and it went 3-1 to 5-1 in the blink of an eye, and that was
the end of that game.
Right.
Yep. Any chance you had evaporated. Right.
So I brought up that if they haven't really let things unravel this year and have the snowball effect and all that stuff, then this is of concern in the last 3 games.
Yeah.
Or last 3 losses, sorry. 4 goals allowed against Tampa in 10:49, which also equates to a 4-goal period. 3 goals against Toronto in 4:15, and that was in the third period. They also gave up 3 in the first period.
Yep.
And then 3 goals allowed to Boston in 2:56, and a total of 4 in the third period.
Yep.
That's especially concerning.
It's these little lapses.
The 2 different responses were, should have picked up a veteran goalie at the deadline, which we had this discussion.
I got time for that.
But we had this discussion. I don't think they were willing to trade anything to get it, but Antti Raanta was on waivers and was basically free.
Literally free. I mean, minus the salary. Literally free.
No, here's the reason why I'm saying it was basically free. Because you made your decision at the deadline that instead of adding a goalie, your choice was get an extra forward and get an extra defenseman, and they're making the money you had.
Yep.
I don't know if they would have been able to equate. Like, I don't think they would have been able to equate it where if they didn't make the trade for Gurianov and bring him to the active roster, that they would have been able to
claim Ranta
to be still be able to claim that 1.5 million. But Johnson's cap hit is over 3 million.
Right. And you didn't need to acquire him, but I know you did, but
you had a greater need to acquire a defenseman than a forward, though, is the point. So
I think you had a greater need to, I guess.
Well, no, the answer was you go out and you get it. If you wanted to get the two things that were of greatest need, you probably get a goalie and a defenseman, not a forward and a defenseman. But
that's fair.
But I digress. The point being, that's kind of where it was at, right? So that's one response to it. Then the other was perhaps trading a quality defenseman like Walker wasn't a smart decision, which is absolutely 1,000% the wrong answer.
That's asinine.
Well, no, you don't do it because you know what the situation was. Yeah. Whether you make the playoffs or not, you got to think about long-term future, and you got a first-round pick for the guy. That's why you make that deal. Like, we don't know at the moment because it hasn't had a chance to play out this way. We don't know at the moment if just bringing Nick Seeler back changes this whole thing. We don't.
I agree.
Was it strictly, hey, having Nick Seeler in no matter who he plays with is going to make a difference? Or is it the Seeler-Walker pairing was that influential to everything that breaking it up, regardless of even if it was just one guy or both, was going to change the whole picture? That's the thing.
Okay.
So that's the hard part. And you don't know that answer, and you won't know until Seeler plays a game again. And there really hasn't been an answer on that because the idea is that it's not believed to be season ending or long term, but you're running out of runway here too. There's only 14 games left. Like, what are we talking about in terms of returning? Are we talking a week and like all of a sudden at Monday's practice, he'll show up? Or are we talking you wait 2-3 weeks and now it's April and there's like a week left and that's when you're scrapping
for points to try to make the playoffs.
Well, it's not even about that.
The situation.
It's not even about that because to me, that's if you're trying to be hopeful on Drysdale and Ristolainen too, that's being hopeful for those guys. Is there's like 5 games left or 4 games left and maybe you get them for the final week.
A tune-up.
That is being hopeful for those guys who look like they could be out for the year, right?
Yeah.
With Seeler, you should be hopeful for at minimum the start of April. At minimum.
Hey folks, Kyle here. Unfortunately, Kevin had something come up and had to go, and we had to cut the show short here. Everything's going to be okay. We are taking next week off anyway. We will be back in 2 weeks with a little more Flyers coverage, heading towards the playoffs. In the meantime, follow us on social media at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Find us everywhere you find your podcast, including sportstalkphilly.com. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, and Flyers have games against Toronto, Carolina, Boston, Florida, the rest of the gauntlet. We'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about it. Take care, and we'll see you.